The WWE Hall of Fame is a topic that has fans split. Some say it is an honour to get inducted during WrestleMania weekend, and others believe the Hall of Fame doesn't hold any merit whatsoever, seeing as it features hand-picked superstars with no sort of voting system or committee selecting inductees. Basically, it comes down to Vince McMahon's approval. When you hear the speeches though, or listen to interviews from legends after their inductions, and when you see a legend getting recognised for their body of work and getting a chance to stand on stage to thank those who helped them along the way, you can tell it means something to those getting the distinction. The Hall of Fame's one of my favourite things about WrestleMania weekend because I love listening to the old stories and learning a little more about the inductees from their point of view. I know I'm in the minority here too, and many dismiss the whole Hall of Fame ceremony during WrestleMania week. I do believe there should be some sort of vote or some other way of selecting inductees, but I still really enjoy watching the Hall of Fame, and I like seeing guys who I grew up with getting one more moment in the spotlight. You can see it's important to the inductees. With that being said, there's some glaring omissions from the Hall of Fame, and there's some folks who haven't been inducted that really should be. Seeing some of the people who have been inducted versus those who haven't makes you scratch your head sometimes, but in saying that, there's others who haven't been inducted because quite simply, the WWE doesn't want to bring attention to those superstars, whether that's for a questionable past, issues with the law, a death that occurred where wrestling played a part in the wrestler no longer being with us. There's multiple reasons why a superstar won't get inducted, and some of those reasons are warranted, while others, I feel, should be dismissed. In today's video, I'm going to look at 10 superstars of the past who I believe should be inducted in the Hall of Fame. By the way, I know for a fact that many of the guys and girls in today's video will never get inducted, or they don't want to be inducted, and I know the reasons why. I don't want to explain why they won't get inducted with every entry, so yes, trust me, I know why some of these guys will never get mentioned by WWE again, and I know why it's pointless thinking these guys will one day get the honour. I just want to make that clear before continuing on. I still want to talk about these guys though because I feel they contributed enough to earn a spot. Owen Hart will not be on today's list. Owen contributed a hell of a lot to the WWF, and a Hall of Fame induction has been talked about a lot, but that Dark Side of the Ring episode about Owen tells us all we need to know. In being selfish, I'd like to see him get inducted if I'm honest, but I also understand why he won't get inducted. Just thought I should bring that up. Finally, the following names are in no particular order. X and Smash were one of the WWF's main tag teams from 1987 to 1990. 1991 saw the team get changed up when Bill Eadie left the company, but the original team was one of the WWF's most prominent duos. They were originally seen as another Road Warriors ripoff, but they managed to carve out their own legacy by becoming 3-time tag team champions in a time when the WWF had some pretty hot tag teams on the roster. Demolition worked with the Powers of Pain, the Hart Foundation, Strike Force, the Rockers, the Brainbusters, and the Colossal Connection, among others, and they held the record for the longest tag team title reign in history with an impressive 478-day reign. The record was held by X and Smash until the New Day broke it in 2016. Demolition, without a doubt, are one of the most recognisable tag teams of the late 80s and early 90s, but WWE are yet to recognise the team with a Hall of Fame induction. Bill Eadie believes that he and Barry Darsow haven't been inducted due to both guys being part of a class action lawsuit filed in 2016 against WWE. The lawsuit alleged that wrestlers incurred brain injuries during their tenure with the company, while the WWE concealed the risks of injury. There were 51 plaintiffs in the lawsuit, including guys like Ahmed Johnson, Shane Douglas, The Barbarian, Marty Jannetty, Sabu, and of course, Demolition. Something I've learned since starting this YouTube channel is that people loved Big Sid just for his sheer presence. Sid completely proves you don't need to be a work rate guy to make it in the world of wrestling, and what's more, Sid won the big one while guys like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were at the top of their game in late '96. Sid's story started long before his WWF title win though. Big Sid Vicious and Dan Spivey formed the Skyscrapers tag team in WCW, and he became the muscle for Ric Flair's Four Horsemen faction. He then appeared in the WWF where he headlined WrestleMania 8 with Hulk Hogan in a match that many fans felt that Sid should have won. Sid did eventually win the WWF title though at Survivor Series 1996, defeating Shawn Michaels and getting a great reaction from Madison Square Garden even though he was a heel. Sid would drop the title to HBK and win it back shortly after from Bret Hart. He would then face The Undertaker in another WrestleMania main event, though he lost the title and his WWF appearances would then become a bit more sporadic. During his third WCW stint, Sid would become the Millennium Man and he would win the US title once and the World Heavyweight title twice. So with Sid's accomplishments in wrestling with these pay-per-view main events and title wins, it seems like he'd be a sure thing for a Hall of Fame induction. Sid says he doesn't feel like he deserves a Hall of Fame induction. He feels his career was cut too short due to his freak leg injury that occurred at WCW Sin, and he feels he had way more to give the wrestling business after he healed up. But I think I speak for most people when I say Sid definitely deserves his spot, and I'd like to see him get inducted one day. When Miss Elizabeth passed away, the WWF were quick to cover the incident in their WWF Confidential show. The piece that aired on Confidential really put Lex in a bad light, and after that aired, neither Luger nor Liz were mentioned on WWF television ever again. It seems though that lately both parties have been more open to working with each other again with the upcoming A&E documentary coming out, and seeing as I don't know what that documentary is going to cover, I could be shooting myself in the foot here. But based on his wrestling career, I feel Luger should get his spot in the Hall of Fame, although there's also a chance it will never happen. Luger embarrassed the WWF by showing up on the first Nitro, and then there's the aforementioned tragedy involving Luger and Miss Elizabeth. Most fans agree that Luger's first WCW run was his best run in any promotion. He was an associate of the Four Horsemen before becoming a full-time member. He won the US title 4 times during his initial stint, and he set the all-time record for the longest reign, 523 days. Luger also won the vacant world title at the 1991 Great American Bash when he defeated Barry Windham, so he had quite the list of accomplishments before joining WWF as the Narcissist. Luger's run as an all-American hero and the Lex Express stuff lives on in infamy as the WWF tried and failed to make Lex Luger the next Hulk Hogan. Luger wasn't able to win the World Wrestling Federation Championship during this run, and the mega push died down considerably in 1994, but Lex stuck around until WCW Nitro debuted on TNT. During this second WCW run, Lex won the world title once again, though his victory was short-lived. But still, his popularity went through the roof when he supported WCW in their battle against the New World Order, and he became WCW's go-to babyface while Sting stayed out of in-ring action. Luger would join the NWO Wolfpack eventually, and he got reborn and renamed to just the Total Package. Things all fell apart for Lex though when Miss Elizabeth passed away, and in 2007 Luger suffered a nerve impingement in his neck or a spinal stroke. It was said that Lex would make a full recovery, but he never did. He could walk short distances, but at present Lex relies on his wheelchair for all mobility. Lex found personal happiness in his faith, and it really seems like he's become a more humble individual who doesn't take things for granted like he maybe once did. I think he'd have a fascinating story to tell, and I do think his accomplishments in the ring earned him a spot in the Hall of Fame. While Rick Martel isn't a guy people associate with championship belts and marquee matches, I think his work as a character and an in-ring performer makes him a prime candidate for a Hall of Fame induction, although I do believe he also said he really wants nothing to do with pro wrestling anymore. It was the Can-Am Connection and Strikeforce tag teams that first really showcased Martel to a worldwide audience, but I absolutely loved his work as the Model, a vain heel who thought his good looks made him better than everyone else. With his arrogance, cologne and his cocky attitude, Martel would walk down the ring with nothing but confidence, and in the ring he could certainly back it up. I don't think Martel gets enough credit for how fundamentally sound he was, and he done a wonderful job of making people look better than what they really were. It confuses me that the Model didn't get pushed a little higher on the cards, and I think he would have made a really good Intercontinental Champion during the early 90s. Martel said he was getting ready to return to the World Wrestling Federation in 1997 along with Don Callis, but a pay dispute led to Martel signing with World Championship Wrestling in early 1998. Though unfortunately his run was cut short after a bad injury. He fractured his leg and tore an inside ligament in his right knee. He did return later in the year, but in his first match back he again got injured, effectively ending his in-ring career, although he did work backstage at WCW as a trainer and a host for French versions of WCW television shows. Brian Pillman had his fair share of problems after his car accident in 1996, and it's a shame the WWE see these issues as a reason not to induct Brian Pillman into their Hall of Fame. Brian was a standout at Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling, but he gained recognition during his days as Flying Brian in WCW. His high-risk moveset excited fans, and he was one of the first guys in American wrestling to add a variety of aerial offense to his regular moveset. Brian and Steve Austin got together to create a fun heel tag team named the Hollywood Blondes, and he made headlines as a loose cannon who seemingly went off script and caused chaos while the cameras were rolling, going on to make remarkable appearances in ECW before showing up again on Nitro briefly. And then he had a run with the Hart Foundation and the World Wrestling Federation that unfortunately didn't showcase what Brian was all about, mainly due to his injury and the self-medication he went through to deal with that injury. Still, Brian has the honour of wrestling the very first Monday Nitro match on TNT. The Rogue Horsemen confused and played with the fans, his peers and the Dirt Sheet Riders by appearing on WCW, ECW and the WWF in the same year, while keeping his cards close to his chest. He doesn't get the recognition he deserves for giving fans the first glimpse of WWF attitude with the infamous Pillman's Got a Gun segment, though Brian's entire career from start to end is one hell of a story that should be talked about more. I already spoke about Lex Luger, and it's pretty safe to say that the circumstances surrounding Miss Elizabeth's untimely death will ensure she will never get inducted into the Hall of Fame, and that's a real shame. Liz absolutely deserves her spot. Liz rose as a star in wrestling without hardly saying a word. Her natural beauty, class and innocence made even the toughest of wrestling fans find a soft spot for Miss Elizabeth, and when Liz was in any kind of danger on TV, fans legit didn't want to see her come to any harm. It was incredible how she provoked these types of fan reactions by being what many would see as a typical damsel in distress. Elizabeth, though, wasn't your typical female valet. While her real-life relationship with Randy Savage was troubled behind the scenes, many people will immediately think of Randy in the wedding ceremony at SummerSlam 1991. The match made in heaven that made fans cry in the arena as Randy and Elizabeth, in storyline, tied the knot. The pair were already really married at the time, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that a wedding ceremony main evented a WWF pay-per-view. If that were to happen today, the company would get ridiculed, and that shows us how much people loved Miss Elizabeth, and Randy for that matter. Liz joined Macho once again in WCW, though things got off to a rocky start. She turned her back on Macho to join Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen as a faction valet. She then joined the NWO unknowingly, and she became Hulk Hogan's little toy to play with, and she was given the Macho Man as a gift when Randy joined the New World Order. By this point, Liz seemed content to stay in the NWO, and she even became part of the NWO Wolfpack before taking a break and coming back for Lex Luger's Reborn run. Still considered today as one of the best female personalities in wrestling and a trendsetter in her own right, I 100% think that Liz should be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Bam! 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 Bam!
One of the most talented big men in all of pro wrestling who changed the game, showing us that there's more to big guys than just power moves. Bam Bam was ridiculously agile for a guy his size, and he stood out with his flame ring attire and his tattooed head. All the makings for a wrestling champion, but Bigelow unfortunately didn't win a single championship belt in the World Wrestling Federation. He did, however, win the ECW World Heavyweight title and their TV title, and over in WCW he captured the Tag Team Championship twice, once with DDP and once with Chris Kanyon. Together, all three were known as the Jersey Triad. Bigelow also won the WCW Hardcore title, but I'm not sure if that belt's ranked very highly. If you want to speak about high-ranking belts though, Bam Bam also won the IWGP Tag Team Championship along with Big Van Vader. He main evented a WrestleMania also, WrestleMania 11. Many people say that Bam Bam carried Lawrence Taylor through their match, but to be fair, Lawrence put in his fair share of work too. Many wrestling purists still didn't like the idea of a celebrity main eventing WrestleMania, but it did give Bam Bam a chance to close the show, and hopefully it gave Bam Bam a decent payday too, so it wasn't all bad. Unfortunately, towards the end, Bam Bam was suffering from multiple health issues and he developed an addiction to opiate painkillers. He was reportedly in a bad way during the final months of his life and he died from an accidental drug overdose. A man who really doesn't need WWF title belts to be considered for an induction in my opinion, and a man who paved the way for other heavy superstars. Bam Bam Bigelow's career should be celebrated. I had a friend who wasn't into wrestling, and when we sat down to watch a show during the Attitude Era, he said to me that what he's watching is just like a rock concert with wrestling thrown in. That told me that while the wrestling wasn't doing much for him, the music and stage show appealed to him way more. His attention was grabbed by the entrances and big lights. The WWE has its own soundtrack that's evolved and changed throughout the years, but the absolute undisputed pioneer of wrestling music is Jim Johnston, the man who composed WWF themes that are still just as legendary today as the superstars themselves. Jim, I think, definitely deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame because not only did he create some insanely good music, but his music could help elevate a superstar's gimmick or persona. The glass shattering for Steve Austin, the gong at the beginning of The Undertaker's theme, the driving guitar riff as the Ultimate Warrior rushes his way down to the ring, that bass line that lends itself to The Rock's swagger as he makes his entrance. There's so many more examples I could give around how Jim Johnston's music made superstars look and feel even bigger than what they already were. Jim also wrote and composed many of the theme songs for WWF television shows and pay-per-views before the company started licensing music for their broadcasts. But it's the timeless pieces of music that played while the superstars made their way to the ring that will forever make Jim an unsung hero of the WWE and a man who absolutely deserves recognition with a Hall of Fame induction. I still can't believe they let Jim go, to be honest, after 32 years of service. Wrestling entrance themes don't hit as hard as what they used to. There are a few good ones out there, but Jim created hit after hit. Give him an induction already and thank the man for providing the whole company with a legendary soundtrack. While his work in the WWF was not his best by a country mile, the Raven character made an impact in ECW. While we can look back at the Raven gimmick nowadays and have a laugh about how brooding and easily annoyed the character was, at the time Raven really was a reflection of the late 90s youth of society. His promos were good, his matches were good, and seeing as Paul Heyman was seemingly the only promoter back then who understood what was cool and hip, he decided to make Raven the main man in ECW. Raven would go on to become a two-time ECW champion, and he had the distinction of headlining the first ever ECW pay-per-view. ECW suited Raven as much as Raven suited ECW. The creative freedoms that Scott was afforded in the Land of Extreme really let him unleash this Raven character, and it worked incredibly well. So well, in fact, that Raven became a hot commodity, and it wasn't long until he'd sign a big money deal with World Championship Wrestling. At the time, WCW were throwing big money at top stars, and Raven got himself an excellent deal to begin working under Eric Bischoff and begin competing against the WWF. Unfortunately though, something was missing in WCW. Raven wasn't spared the same time or given the same creative freedom in Atlanta, and although WCW tried with Raven's Flock and Raven Rules matches, the character lost a bit of his edge, I feel, when he went to WCW. His WWF run, I think, isn't even worth bringing up. You can clearly see what happens when a creative mind gets locked down by the machine here, and Raven, as a character, was a shell of his former self. He was thrown straight into the hardcore division because ex-ECW guy equals hardcore wrestler in the eyes of Vince and company. Raven also had a run in TNA that was well received, and his feud with CM Punk also received critical acclaim, a feud that spanned across multiple promotions. For his work in ECW and the creative ideas behind the Raven gimmick, for helping others to establish their gimmicks too, and for his run in ECW alone as a complex and alternative yet highly engaging and compelling man, I think Raven deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. He'd probably tell the WWF to go F themselves anyway if he got an invite. This is a guy who I believe will get his induction. I think the company are just waiting for the day he decides to go home, but hopefully that day doesn't arrive anytime soon. Paul Heyman was a very polarizing individual in the world of pro wrestling, but man, when they talk about genius minds and having your finger on the pulse, as a promoter, Paul Heyman was revolutionary. The fact that he tapped into the underground wrestling scene and rose a promotion up through the dirt to create a globally recognized extreme wrestling organization is nothing short of brilliant. And while he took every shortcut known to man, and while he may have made promises he couldn't keep, the fact that ECW existed on the scale that it did speaks volumes on how smart the guy truly was and still is. There seems to be a disconnect sometimes with big promoters when it comes to pop culture. The likes of Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff seem to always be a little late when trying to capitalize on what was happening in the real world, or sometimes they would just swing and miss in spectacular fashion. Paul Heyman, on the other hand, tapped into what made teenagers and young adults tick in the 90s, and he done it in a way that didn't pander to the audience. Paul Heyman created a movement both for the fans and for the wrestlers involved in his shows. ECW and Paul Heyman paved the way for the WWF's Attitude Era, and still to this day, people talk about ECW even though the real ECW closed in 2001. When Paul moved to the World Wrestling Federation, he eventually became the head writer for SmackDown, and he pretty much made it a must-see program all on his own, thanks to his ability to see talent in underutilized superstars. SmackDown became the place to see good wrestling weekly while Paul was in control. And then, when Paul's on TV with his clients, his promos never miss. They never miss. With a real ability to talk to people in a way that makes everyone stop and listen, Heyman, in my opinion, should now be in the discussions as one of the greatest managers of all time, certainly the best in the modern era for sure. As mentioned, I do believe Paulie will get his induction, but if it comes at the cost of losing him on TV, then I'd rather he stayed out of the Hall of Fame for as long as possible. That'll do it then. Those were just 10 names, but I could mention more. Ivan Koloff, Jim Cornette, The Rockers, Earthquake, Tom Pritchard, Too Cool, The Nation of Domination, Jerry Lynn, Tony Schiavone. I've even heard people talk about Ted Turner getting an induction, and I think that would be pretty cool to see too. Again, these weren't in any sort of order, so don't come at me saying, yeah, Wrestling Bios thinks Raven should go into the Hall of Fame before Ivan Koloff or stuff like that. These were just names that I wanted to talk about today, and maybe we can revisit this topic in the future. So let me know who you'd like to see get inducted in the comments. One last thing before closing the video, hopefully the WWE extend the time of the Hall of Fame speeches. It looks like they're allocating just a few minutes for speeches now unless you're a big main event name, and that needs fixed. I know the Hall of Fame isn't for everyone and some fans couldn't care less, I know this, but for us that do, it would be nice if those time limits were lifted, unless your name's Hillbilly Jim. Thanks for watching guys, and take care.